The blood-red sunset painted the horizon as Violet Sullivan's dusty boots hit the wooden planks of Copper Creek's main street, her heart pounding with equal parts fear and determination. 3 weeks without word from Benjamin Calloway was 3 weeks too long, and the whispers around town had finally driven her to the one place no respectable woman would dare enter alone, the Silver Dollar Saloon. Copper Creek, Wyoming Territory, 1878, was no place for a woman alone, but Violet had long since stopped caring what others thought. 6 months of marriage to Benjamin had taught her that much at least. The tall, broad-shouldered man who'd swept her off her feet with promises of a prosperous ranch and endless happiness had disappeared with alarming frequency lately, and this time, she was determined to find out why. The heavy saloon doors loomed before her like the gates to another world. Violet adjusted her simple blue calico dress, squared her shoulders, and pushed through into a realm of tobacco smoke, whiskey, and the distinctive smell of too many unwashed men crowded into one space. The piano player faltered mid-tune. Conversation died. 20 pairs of eyes swiveled toward her, and the ensuing silence stretched for 3 heartbeats before erupting into raucous laughter. "Well, look what the wind blew in," hooted a red-faced miner from the corner. "You lost, little lady," another called out, prompting more laughter. Violet stood frozen, her cheeks burning with humiliation but her chin lifted defiantly. Through the haze, she spotted her husband at a poker table in the back, cards in one hand, whiskey in the other, and a buxom saloon girl perched on his knee. The laughter crescendoed. Benjamin's face drained of color as he hastily pushed the woman aside and stood, knocking over his chair. "Looking for someone, madam?" A deep voice cut through the jeers, so close to her ear that Violet startled. She turned to find a tall stranger beside her. Unlike the other patrons, he wasn't laughing. His face remained impassive beneath the shadow of his hat, but his eyes, a startling shade of blue, conveyed something that might have been respect. "Seems to me," he continued, loud enough for the room to hear, "that a lady brave enough to walk in here deserves some common courtesy." His hand rested casually on the revolver at his hip, and the laughter gradually subsided. Violet had never seen this man before. His clothes were trail-worn but clean, dark pants tucked into scuffed boots, a faded blue shirt beneath a leather vest, and a worn duster. The silver star pinned to his chest identified him as a lawman, though not local. "I'm looking for my husband," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. The stranger nodded once. "Then I suggest these gentlemen let you conduct your business." He swept his gaze across the room, a silent challenge that no one seemed eager to accept. As the saloon patrons returned to their drinks and card games, Violet squared her shoulders and marched toward Benjamin, acutely aware of the stranger following a respectful distance behind her. What happened next would change the course of her life forever. Blake Cormack had ridden into Copper Creek that morning with no intention of staying longer than it took to water his horse and maybe grab a hot meal. 15 years as a U.S. Marshal had taught him the value of passing through places without leaving an impression. Yet something about the town had made him linger, perhaps the way the mountains framed it against the sky, or the fact that it was just small enough to feel like somewhere a man could disappear if he wanted to. He certainly hadn't planned on playing knight-errant to a woman storming into a saloon, no matter how brave or foolhardy that might be. But when she'd pushed through those doors, back straight as a lodgepole pine despite the mockery, something in him had responded instinctively. Now, as he watched her confront the man at the poker table, presumably her husband, Blake knew he'd entangled himself in something he ought to have avoided. Still, he couldn't bring himself to walk away. "Benjamin," the woman said, her voice carrying clearly in the now hushed room. "I believe it's time you came home." The man Benjamin Calloway, according to the local gossip Blake had overheard earlier, looked like he'd rather face a firing squad. Medium height, with the soft hands of someone who'd never worked a day of hard labor, he had the kind of handsome face that probably charmed more women than just his wife. "Violet," Benjamin sputtered, This is hardly appropriate. Appropriate? Her laugh held no humor. You disappear for nearly a month, our mortgage payment is due, and you speak to me of appropriate. The saloon girl who'd been on Benjamin's lap snickered, earning a glare from Violet. Benjamin's face hardened. We'll discuss this at home. There won't be a home to discuss anything in if you gamble away what little we have left, Violet replied, then gestured to the pile of coins on the table. Is that our money, Benjamin? Is that the money meant for our land payment? Blake watched the man's expression shift from embarrassment to anger. He'd seen that look before, the kind of mean pride that made men dangerous. Now you listen here, Benjamin hissed, grabbing Violet's arm roughly. I won't be humiliated by my own wife in front of. Blake stepped forward, his hand catching Benjamin's wrist in a grip that made the smaller man wince. I believe the lady asked you a question, friend. Benjamin's eyes darted between Blake's face and the badge on his chest. This is a private matter, Marshal. Putting hands on a woman in anger doesn't stay private in my presence, Blake replied evenly. Now, why don't you answer your wife's question about that money? The saloon had gone deadly quiet. Even the piano player had stopped, watching the scene unfold like everyone else. Benjamin slowly released Violet's arm, his face a mask of barely contained fury. Yes, he finally admitted. It's what's left of our mortgage money. But I was winning until you showed up, he added accusingly to Violet. That's what you said last time, she whispered, hurt and betrayal written across her face. And the time before that. Blake noticed the red marks forming on Violet's arm where her husband had grabbed her. Something cold settled in his stomach. Mrs. Calloway, he said formally, would you allow me to escort you home? It seems your husband has some thinking to do about his priorities. Before Violet could respond, Benjamin lunged forward. You keep away from my wife. His hand went for the small pistol tucked in his waistband. Blake moved with the efficient speed that had kept him alive through 15 years of chasing outlaws. His hand locked around Benjamin's wrist, twisting until the man cried out and the weapon clattered to the floor. In one fluid motion, Blake spun him around and slammed him face first onto the poker table, scattering cards and coins. That was unwise, Blake said calmly, securing Benjamin's hands behind his back. Threatening a U.S. Marshal carries serious consequences. You can't arrest me for trying to protect my wife, Benjamin protested, struggling ineffectively. I'm arresting you for attempted assault with a deadly weapon, Blake corrected. He looked up at Violet, whose face had gone pale. Mrs. Calloway, I apologize for the disturbance. Is there someone who can accompany you home? Violet's eyes, a striking shade of green that reminded Blake of spring grass after rain, met his. I can manage on my own, Marshal. I've been doing so for some time now. There was such dignity in her words that Blake found himself momentarily at a loss. This woman, humiliated in public, betrayed by her husband, still stood tall. Nevertheless, he said, I'll need to speak with you after I've secured Mr. Calloway in the town jail. There will be questions about what happened here. As Blake led the protesting Benjamin from the saloon, he couldn't help glancing back at Violet Sullivan Calloway. She stood amid the scattered coins on the floor, her expression a complex mixture of shame, relief, and uncertainty about what would come next. Neither of them could have guessed how intertwined their lives were about to become. The Calloway homestead sat a mile outside town, a modest cabin with a small barn and corral, backed by a stream that fed into a meadow where a few head of cattle grazed. It wasn't much, but it represented everything Violet had worked for since arriving in Wyoming territory 2 years ago. She'd come west as a schoolteacher, determined to leave behind the stifling propriety of her Philadelphia upbringing. Benjamin had courted her with grand tales of the empire. He planned to build a cattle ranch that would rival any in Wyoming. His charm and ambition had been irresistible to a 23-year-old woman hungry for adventure. Now, at 25, Violet knew better. The empire existed only in Benjamin's imagination. The reality was a small holding perpetually one payment away from foreclosure, thanks to her husband's gambling. As she approached the cabin, the events at the saloon replayed in her mind. The laughter still burned, but it was Benjamin's betrayal that cut deepest. Not just the gambling or the saloon girl she'd suspected both, but the look in his eyes when he'd grabbed her. For that moment, he'd truly hated her. And then there was the marshal, Blake Cormack, she'd learned from whispers as she left the saloon. A U.S. Marshal passing through on his way to Cheyenne. The kind of lawman whose reputation preceded him, fair but uncompromising, the whispers said. Violet wasn't sure why he'd intervened. Men like him usually minded their own business. Yet something in his blue eyes when he'd stood beside her had conveyed not pity, but a simple recognition of her dignity. It was the first time in months she'd felt truly seen. She lit the lamps as dusk settled, then sat at the rough-hewn table to take stock of their finances. With the money Benjamin had lost, they were 2 months behind on the mortgage. The bank would foreclose within weeks unless she found a solution. A knock at the door startled her. The sun had set completely, and visitors were rare, especially after dark. Mrs. Calloway? The deep voice was unmistakable. Violet opened the door to find Marshal Cormack standing on her porch, hat in hand. His horse, a magnificent black gelding, was tethered to the hitching post. "Marshal," she acknowledged, suddenly conscious of her rumpled dress and loosened hair. "Is something wrong?"
"No, madam."
"I've secured your husband in the town jail. He'll face the circuit judge when he arrives next week." The marshal's expression was apologetic. "I wanted to ensure you were safely home and ask a few questions if you don't mind." Violet hesitated only briefly before stepping back. "Please come in. I can offer coffee, though I'm afraid it's not very good." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I've drunk coffee that would strip paint off a wagon. I'm sure yours is fine." The cabin's main room was small but tidy. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, while Violet's attempts at homemaking curtains sewn from flour sacks, a braided rug, wildflowers in a jar softened the rustic interior. As she busied herself with the coffee, Blake remained standing, his tall frame making the cabin seem smaller. He removed his duster, revealing broad shoulders and the lean physique of a man who lived in the saddle. The badge on his vest caught the lamplight. "Your husband will likely be fined or serve a short sentence," he said. "The judge is fair, but he takes a dim view of drawing weapons in public establishments." Violet set 2 tin cups on the table. "Please sit, Marshal. Standing there makes me nervous." He complied, though he seemed too large for the chair. His hat rested on his knee, revealing dark hair streaked with the occasional silver strand at his temples. Violet guessed him to be in his late 30s, though the lines around his eyes suggested he'd seen more than his years might indicate. "How long have you been married, Mrs. Calloway?" he asked after accepting the coffee. 6 months, officially. We were engaged for nearly a year before that." Violet sat across from him. "Though it seems I hardly know my husband at all." Blake nodded. "Has he been violent before?" The question hung in the air. Violet stared into her cup.
"Not
physically. Benjamin's temper shows itself in words, mostly. Until today." "I see." His voice remained neutral, but something in his eyes hardened. "And the gambling?" "Started about 3 months ago. At least, that's when I noticed money missing." She gestured to the papers on the table. "We're behind on our mortgage. If the payment isn't made soon, we'll lose everything." Blake's gaze swept over the cabin. "You've made a home here." It wasn't a question, but Violet answered anyway. "I've tried. I came west to build something of my own. Teaching doesn't pay much, but between that and what we earn from the cattle, we should be managing." She smiled sadly. Benjamin always had grand plans. Reality hasn't lived up to them. "Men with grand plans often leave others to deal with the consequences," Blake observed. He finished his coffee and set the cup down. "Mrs. Calloway, Violet," she interrupted. After today's events, formality seems rather pointless. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or approval. Violet, then. I'll be in town until the circuit judge arrives. If you have concerns about your safety when your husband is released, please don't hesitate to find me. She studied him, trying to understand his interest. Why did you help me today, Marshall? Most men would have looked the other way. Blake was silent for a moment, as if considering how much to reveal. I've seen too many people hurt because others refuse to get involved. It's a simple thing, really stepping in when it's needed. But it wasn't simple, and they both knew it. Men didn't interfere in marriage disputes, especially not in frontier towns where private business stayed private. Well, Violet said finally, I appreciate it, regardless of your reasons. Blake stood, settling his hat back on his head. I should let you rest. Is there anyone nearby you could stay with, just until things settle? I'll be fine here, she assured him. I have a shotgun and know how to use it. Besides, this is my home. I won't be driven from it. The marshal nodded, respecting her decision, even if his expression suggested he wasn't entirely comfortable with it. At the door, he paused. One more thing. Your husband had this in his pocket. He held out a folded document. It appears to be a deed transfer. He was planning to sell your property to a man named Crawford. The signature line for the wife's consent is blank. Violet took the paper with trembling hands. He was going to sell our home without telling me? So it appears. Blake's expression was grim. You might want to speak with the bank about protecting your interests. After he left, Violet sat for a long time with the deed transfer in her hands, wondering how her life had unraveled so completely and what would become of her now. Blake rode into town with his thoughts in turmoil. He'd planned to pass through Copper Creek, handle his business in Cheyenne, and then head back to his regular circuit. Getting involved in local matters, especially domestic ones, complicated things unnecessarily. Yet, he couldn't shake the image of Violet Sullivan Calloway standing in that saloon, dignity intact despite the humiliation. Or later, in her simple cabin, facing financial ruin with the same quiet strength. The town was settling for the night as he tied his horse outside the modest building that served as jail and sheriff's office. Inside, Sheriff Tom Rollins, a barrel-chested man with a gray-streaked beard, looked up from his desk. Calloway's still raisin' hell, Rollins reported. Threatenin' legal action, political connections, the usual bluster. Blake hung his hat on a peg. Let him. Judge Wilson will sort it out. His type usually does have connections, Rollins warned. Money talks, even out here. If he had money, his wife wouldn't be worried about losing their home. Blake poured himself coffee from the pot on the stove. What do you know about him? Rollins leaned back in his chair. Showed up about 2 years ago. Smooth talker. Always hinting at big deals in the works. Married the schoolteacher last year, pretty little thing with more sense than to choose him if you ask me. Any family? None that ever visited. Claims to have banking connections back east, but I've never seen evidence of it. Rollins eyed Blake curiously. You're taking a particular interest in this one. Blake shrugged. Just doing my job. Pulling a gun on a U.S. Marshal is one thing. What happens between a man and his wife is another. The sheriff's tone wasn't accusatory, merely matter of fact. You won't be here when he gets out. The implication was clear. Whatever protection Blake offered Violet was temporary at best. I spoke with Mrs. Calloway, Blake said. She believes she can handle herself. Rollins snorted. Women always think that until they can't. Benjamin Calloway isn't the type to forgive being publicly humiliated, badge or no badge. Blake knew the sheriff was right. He'd seen it too often, men whose pride drove them to terrible acts when they felt shamed or challenged, especially by a woman. I'll check on her again tomorrow, he decided. In the meantime, keep Calloway locked up tight. I don't care what connections he claims to have. Later, in the small room he'd rented at the boarding house, Blake stared at the ceiling, sleep eluding him. 15 years of moving from town to town, Never staying long enough to form attachments had suited him fine. The badge gave him purpose. The solitude gave him peace. So, why did he feel so restless now? Why did the thought of Violet alone in that cabin trouble him so? He told himself it was professional concern, a lawman's duty to protect the vulnerable. But deep down, Blake recognized something he hadn't felt in a very long time, a connection to another human being that went beyond duty. It was dangerous territory for a man in his position. Dangerous, and yet somehow inevitable from the moment he'd seen her walk into that saloon. Dawn found Violet already at work, feeding the chickens and milking their single cow. Sleep had been elusive, her mind replaying the confrontation with Benjamin and the revelation of his plan to sell their property. The deed transfer had named James Crawford as the buyer, a cattle baron who owned most of the land east of Copper Creek. Crawford had been trying to expand westward for years, making offers on smaller homesteads like theirs. The price Benjamin had agreed to was far below market value, suggesting either desperation or, more likely, that some of the money had already changed hands unofficially. As she carried fresh milk to the house, Violet spotted a rider approaching. Even at a distance, she recognized Marshal Cormac's straight-backed posture and black gelding. By the time he reached the yard, she'd set the milk inside and smoothed her hair, though she immediately felt foolish for doing so. What did it matter how she looked to this man who was simply doing his job? "Good morning, Marshal," she called as he dismounted. "You're out early." "Blake," he corrected with a slight smile. "Since we're dispensing with formalities." The morning sun caught in his dark hair as he removed his hat. Without the shadow of the brim, his face appeared younger, though no less weathered by years outdoors. "Blake, then," Violet agreed. "I was about to make breakfast." "You're welcome to join me if you haven't eaten." He hesitated, then nodded. "Much obliged. I brought something that might interest you first." From his saddlebag, he produced a folded newspaper. The Cheyenne Daily Sunday. "There's an article about land speculation in this region. Seems Crawford has been buying properties at depressed prices, then selling them to the railroad for considerable profit." Violet took the paper. So Benjamin wasn't just gambling away our future, he was selling it cheap. "It appears so. The bank manager in town, Mr. Peterson, is expecting you this morning." "I took the liberty of mentioning your situation." At her surprised look, he added, "Sometimes a word from the law helps expedite matters." "I appreciate that." Violet led the way inside. "Though I'm not sure what good it will do. Without Benjamin's income unreliable as it was, I can't make the payments on just my teaching salary." Blake remained standing while Violet busied herself at the stove, cracking eggs into a cast-iron pan. "I've been thinking about that. Your land includes water rights to the stream, correct?" She nodded. "It's why Crawford wants it. His eastern pastures are too dry in summer. Those rights are valuable. Peterson might be willing to restructure your loan if he understands their worth." Blake finally sat at her gesture. "And there's the matter of your legal standing regarding the property." Violet turned from the stove. "What do you mean?" "Wyoming Territory has some of the most progressive laws regarding married women's property rights. If your name is on the deed, Benjamin can't legally sell without your consent." Hope flickered in Violet's chest. "My name is on the deed. I insisted when we married, though Benjamin thought it unnecessary." "That's fortunate." Blake accepted the plate she offered. "It gives you options." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Violet found herself studying the Marshal when he wasn't looking, the careful way he handled her mismatched tableware, the strength evident in his hands despite their gentleness. "May I ask you something personal?" she finally said. Blake looked up, those striking blue eyes meeting hers directly.
"You may ask."
"I might not answer." "Fair enough." Violet set down her fork. "Have you ever been married? You seem to understand the legal complexities rather well." Something shuddered in his expression, though his voice remained even. "I was a long time ago." She died in childbirth, along with our son. I'm so sorry, Violet said softly, regretting her question. That was intrusive of me. Blake shook his head. It was 12 years ago. Clara would be disappointed if I couldn't speak of her at all. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. She was a lawyer's daughter. Taught me more about legal matters than any schooling could have. Violet tried to imagine this reserved, self-contained man as a husband, a father-to-be. It was both easy and impossible to picture. Is that why you became a marshal? She asked. After losing them? Blake considered this.
Partly.
I was already in law enforcement, but local work tied me to places filled with memories. The marshal service meant movement, distance. He set down his cup. What about you? Teaching seems an unusual choice for a woman who homesteads. Not so unusual, Violet countered. Many women teach until they marry. I simply continued afterward. She glanced around the small cabin. I came west because I wanted something that was mine. Teaching gives me purpose, but this land, she gestured toward the window and the meadow beyond. This is freedom. Understanding passed between them the recognition of kindred spirits who valued independence above conventional paths. I should get to town, Violet said, breaking the moment. The bank opens at 9. Blake stood. I'll ride with you if you don't mind. I need to check on your husband anyway. As they rode side by side toward Copper Creek, Violet felt a curious lightness despite her circumstances. For the first time in months, she wasn't facing her problems alone. The Copper Creek Bank occupied a sturdy brick building on the main street, its imposing facade designed to inspire confidence in depositors. Inside, polished wood and brass fixtures created an atmosphere of solidity and permanence. Horace Peterson, the bank manager, was a thin man with spectacles and a perpetual frown. His expression grew even more severe when Violet entered with Blake at her side. Mrs. Calloway, Peterson acknowledged stiffly. Marshal Cormac mentioned you would be coming. His gaze flickered to Blake, clearly uncomfortable with the lawman's presence. Thank you for seeing me, Violet said. I understand our mortgage payment is overdue. Peterson shuffled papers on his desk. 2 months overdue, to be precise. I'm afraid the bank's patience is not unlimited. Mrs. Calloway has come to discuss options, Blake interjected. Given that her husband is currently indisposed. The banker's lips thinned. Yes, I heard about the incident. Most unfortunate. However, Mr. Calloway's legal difficulties don't change the bank's position. Violet placed the deed transfer on the desk. Are you aware that my husband attempted to sell our property without my consent? To James Crawford. Peterson blinked rapidly. I had heard rumors of negotiations, but you didn't think to inform me, despite my name being on the deed? Violet's voice remained calm, though her hands trembled slightly. That would be a breach of client confidentiality, the banker protested. Blake leaned forward. It would also be a breach of territorial law to facilitate a property transfer without the consent of all deed holders. I wonder what the Banking Commission would think of such practices. Peterson's face paled. No transfer was completed. I assure you, the bank has done nothing improper. I'm relieved to hear it, Violet said. Now, about our mortgage. I'd like to discuss restructuring the loan under my name alone. For the next hour, Violet negotiated with increasing confidence. Blake remained largely silent, his presence lending weight to her position. When they finally emerged from the bank, Violet held a new agreement the loan extended with slightly lower monthly payments, secured against her teaching salary and the property's water rights. I can't believe he agreed, she said as they walked down the street. 3 months ago, he wouldn't even speak to me without Benjamin present. Blake smiled. You were persuasive. Peterson recognized you know your rights and aren't afraid to assert them. Having a U.S. Marshal glowering behind me certainly helped, Violet added with a laugh, the first genuine one she'd experienced in weeks. I don't glower, Blake protested mildly. I observe with appropriate seriousness. Their eyes met, and for a moment, something passed between them, a current of understanding and connection that caught them both by surprise. The moment broke when someone called Violet's name. They turned to see Martha Wilkins, the mayor's wife and unofficial town matriarch, bearing down on them with determined strides. Violet Sullivan Calloway, I have been looking everywhere for you, Martha exclaimed, her considerable bosom heaving with exertion. She eyed Blake suspiciously before continuing. Is it true? Benjamin in jail, and you confronting him in that den of iniquity. Violet straightened. It's true, I went to the Silver Dollar to find my husband, Mrs. Wilkins. The rest is private family business. Martha's eyes widened at this uncharacteristic assertiveness. Well, I never. The school board will have something to say about this, mark my words. A teacher must be above reproach in her personal conduct. Mrs. Calloway was the victim of financial deception and attempted assault, Blake said quietly. If the school board wishes to punish her for that, I'd be interested to hear their reasoning. Martha gaped at him, then at Violet. Well, that is, she collected herself. Nevertheless, appearances matter, especially for someone entrusted with children's education. I'll be at the schoolhouse Monday morning as usual, Mrs. Wilkins, Violet said firmly. If the board has concerns, they can address them to me directly. As Martha huffed away, Violet felt a strange mixture of dread and exhilaration. She might have just jeopardized her teaching position, yet standing up for herself felt surprisingly liberating. I should go check on your husband, Blake said, breaking into her thoughts. Will you be all right? Violet nodded. I have errands to finish. Thank you for your help with Peterson. You did the hard part yourself, he reminded her. Then, more seriously, be careful, Violet. Word travels fast in small towns. Not everyone will understand your actions. I'm beginning to care less about being understood and more about being true to myself, she replied. As they parted ways, Violet couldn't help wondering how a stranger passing through town had somehow become her strongest ally and why his opinion had come to matter so much in such a short time. The jail cell was sparse, but clean, a testament to Sheriff Rollins's standards, if not his budget. Benjamin Calloway sat on the narrow cot, his usually immaculate appearance showing the strain of a night behind bars. Come to gloat, Marshal? He asked when Blake entered. Blake leaned against the wall opposite the cell. Just checking that you're being treated properly. Oh, splendidly, Benjamin said with bitter sarcasm. Nothing like false imprisonment to improve one's day. Drawing a weapon on a federal officer isn't a false charge, Calloway. Benjamin stood, approaching the bars. It was a misunderstanding. I thought you were threatening my wife. By offering to escort her home? Blake kept his tone neutral. That seems an extreme reaction. You don't understand. Violet is sensitive, impressionable. Benjamin ran a hand through his disheveled hair. I was protecting her. From what, exactly? From men like you, Benjamin snapped. Riding in with your badge and your reputation, making her think you're some kind of hero. He gripped the bars. I know your type, Marshal. You'll be gone as soon as the next assignment calls, leaving behind whatever damage you've caused. The accusation struck closer to home than Blake cared to admit. He'd always been careful not to form attachments precisely because his work demanded mobility. Yet Benjamin's words carried the unmistakable taint of projection. Seems to me, Blake said carefully, that you're the one causing damage here. Gambling away your mortgage money. Planning to sell your property without your wife's knowledge. Benjamin's expression shifted from anger to calculation. She showed you the transfer? That was a misunderstanding, too. Crawford approached me about purchasing water rights, not the whole property. The document says otherwise. A draft only. Nothing was finalized. Benjamin's tone turned conciliatory. Look, Marshal. We both know Judge Wilson will give me a fine at most. Why not release me now? I'll make amends with Violet, pay whatever penalty the court decides, and we can all move on. Blake studied the man, seeing beyond the smooth facade to the desperation beneath. That's not my decision to make. You'll face the judge like anyone else. And in the meantime, you'll console my wife? Benjamin's voice hardened. Don't think I haven't noticed how you look at her, or how she responds. Blake kept his expression impassive, though the accusations stirred emotions he'd rather not examine. Mrs. Calloway is handling her affairs admirably, without either of our input. I suggest you use this time to consider your own actions rather than inventing conspiracies. As he turned to leave, Benjamin called after him. She won't leave Copper Creek, you know. Violet loves teaching those children too much. And when I'm released, I'll still be her husband. Remember that, Marshall. Outside, Blake paused on the boardwalk, unsettled by the conversation. Benjamin Calloway was manipulative and deceitful, but he'd made one valid point. Blake would eventually leave Copper Creek. His job demanded it. Whatever connection he felt to Violet Sullivan Calloway, it could lead nowhere good. For both their sakes, he needed to maintain professional distance. Yet as he spotted her across the street, speaking with a young mother and her children, Blake knew that resolution would be harder to keep than to make. Over the next 5 days, Violet settled into a new routine. Mornings were spent tending the homestead, afternoons teaching the summer session for children whose parents needed them occupied during harvest preparation, and evenings reinforcing her independence in 100 small ways. She moved her belongings from the main bedroom to the small alcove she'd once used as a reading nook. She rearranged furniture to better suit her preferences rather than Benjamin's. She ate dinner at the small writing desk instead of the main table, enjoying meals of her own choosing at times that suited her schedule. These changes, trivial as they might seem, represented a reclaiming of her space and identity. The home that had increasingly felt like Benjamin's domain gradually transformed into her sanctuary. Blake Cormack appeared occasionally, ostensibly to check on her welfare. Their conversations, initially cautious, grew more comfortable with each visit. Violet learned that he'd grown up in Missouri, joined the Army at 18, and become a lawman after the war. He spoke little of his wife Clara, but when he did, it was with a gentle reverence that touched Violet deeply. For his part, Blake discovered that Violet had been raised by a professor father who believed in educating daughters as thoroughly as sons. She'd taught in Philadelphia before the restlessness that brought so many westward caught her in its grip. Her knowledge of literature and history matched his own self-taught passion for both. They were careful to meet only in public or with her front door wide open to avoid gossip, though it spread anyway. Violet endured disapproving glances at church on Sunday and whispers when she entered the general store. The school board, led by Martha Wilkins's husband, called a special meeting to discuss concerns about faculty conduct, though they ultimately took no action after several parents defended Violet's teaching. On the 5th evening, Violet sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold when Blake rode up. He looked troubled. Judge Wilson arrived early, he said without preamble as he dismounted. He'll hear cases tomorrow, including your husband's. Violet's stomach tightened. So soon? I thought we had more time. So did I. Blake remained standing by his horse. Benjamin will likely be released by tomorrow afternoon. The charge is serious, but it's his first offense. The judge tends toward leniency in such cases. The news shouldn't have been surprising, yet Violet felt unprepared. She'd been living in a strange limbo, neither married in any real sense, nor truly independent. I see, she said finally. Thank you for letting me know. Blake shifted, clearly uncomfortable. Violet, I need to ask what you intend to do when he returns.
Do.
Will you take him back? Continue as his wife. His voice remained neutral, but something in his eyes betrayed deeper concern. Violet looked out toward the mountains. I don't know, she admitted. Marriage isn't easily dissolved, especially here. And despite everything, we built this place together. She met his gaze. What would you advise, Marshal? The return to his title was deliberate, a reminder of his official capacity. Blake recognized it as such. Officially, I can't advise on marital matters. Unofficially. He hesitated. I've seen men like Benjamin Calloway before. They rarely change their nature, only their tactics. You think he's dangerous? I think he's cornered. His schemes exposed, his pride wounded. That makes any man unpredictable. Blake's expression softened. You deserve better, Violet. The simple statement hung between them, laden with meanings neither was ready to acknowledge. Perhaps I do, she said quietly. But wanting better and achieving it are different matters entirely. Blake nodded, understanding the complexities she faced. In frontier communities, a woman alone faced not just practical challenges but social ostracism. Divorce, while legally possible, carried stigma that could make her position as a teacher untenable. Whatever you decide, he said, remember you have allies here. Sheriff Rollins may seem gruff, but he's fair. And Mrs. Henderson at the boarding house mentioned she'd welcome your company anytime. Violet smiled faintly at his attempt to reassure her. And you, Blake? Will you still be my ally when Benjamin returns? The question carried weight beyond its simple words. I'll be in town until the end of the week, he answered carefully. After that, I'm due in Cheyenne. Of course. His duty lay elsewhere. Violet nodded, accepting this reality she'd always known but somehow allowed herself to forget. Then I should thank you now, she said, rising from her chair, for your intervention that day and everything since. Not many would have bothered. Blake looked as if he might say more, but instead touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement. Good night, Mrs. Calloway. I'll send word after the hearing tomorrow. As he rode away, Violet remained on the porch long after darkness fell, contemplating choices that suddenly seemed both urgent and impossible. Judge Ephraim Wilson conducted court in the town hall, a space more accustomed to hosting socials and town meetings than legal proceedings. By 10 o'clock, every available seat was filled with spectators eager to witness Benjamin Calloway's hearing. Blake stood at the back, observing both the proceedings and the audience. Gossip had transformed the incident at the Silver Dollar into a local sensation. Some viewed Benjamin sympathetically, a man provoked into rash action by his wife's impropriety. Others, particularly the women, seemed quietly supportive of Violet, who sat alone in the front row, her back straight and her expression composed. Benjamin had been allowed to clean up for his appearance. Freshly shaved and wearing his best suit, he presented a picture of respectable contrition that Blake found transparently false, but which clearly impressed several members of the audience. When called to account for his actions, Benjamin spoke eloquently of a misunderstanding fueled by concern for his wife's welfare. He expressed profound regret for drawing his weapon and assured the judge that such a lapse would never recur. Judge Wilson, a pragmatic man who had seen every variety of frontier justice in his 30 years on the bench, listened impassively before rendering his verdict: a $50 fine and time served. The court recognizes that passions run high when family matters are concerned, Wilson intoned. However, Mr. Calloway, I caution you that any future incidents will be viewed less charitably. The law serves everyone equally, including wives who seek their husbands. As the judge moved on to the next case, Benjamin turned in his seat to look directly at Violet. His expression conveyed triumph rather than remorse, and Blake felt a surge of concern that had nothing to do with professional duty. When court adjourned for lunch, Blake intercepted Violet as she left the building. Are you all right? He asked quietly, noting her pallor. Fine, she replied, though her voice lacked conviction. It went as expected. He'll be released within the hour. Blake glanced toward the jail, where Benjamin was being processed out. Do you want me to accompany you home? Violet shook her head. That would only antagonize him further. She attempted a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I need to face this myself, Blake. He understood her reasoning, but hated the necessity of it. At least let me ride out later to ensure everything is settled. If you must. She looked up at him, her green eyes troubled. But give us time first. Benjamin will be defensive enough, without feeling monitored. As she walked away, Blake was struck by a sensation he rarely experienced: helplessness. His badge granted authority in matters of law, but offered no jurisdiction over the human heart, neither Benjamin's capacity for deception nor Violet's stubborn courage. Nor, he acknowledged privately, over his own growing feelings for a woman he had no right to care for. Benjamin arrived at the homestead late in the afternoon, riding a borrowed horse and carrying a small package wrapped in brown paper. Violet watched his approach from the porch, her emotions a turbulent mix of dread, anger, and the faint, foolish hope that somehow this ordeal might lead to positive change. "Violet," he greeted her with a smile that had once made her heart flutter. "You look lovely." She didn't return the smile. Benjamin. If her coolness bothered him, he didn't show it. "I brought you something." He handed her the package. A peace offering. Inside was a silver hair comb inlaid with small blue stones, pretty, but not expensive. The sort of gift he'd given during their courtship, when trying to smooth over disappointments. "Thank you," she said automatically, setting it aside. "We need to talk." "Of course we do. I have so much to explain." Benjamin stepped toward the door. "May I come inside? It's been a trying few days." Violet hesitated, then nodded. It was still his home legally, whatever else had changed. Inside, Benjamin surveyed the rearranged furniture with raised eyebrows but made no comment. He removed his jacket and hung it carefully before sitting at the table. "Coffee?" Violet offered, falling back on social niceties to delay the inevitable confrontation. "Please." Benjamin's smile returned. "No one makes it quite like you." As she prepared the coffee, he spoke of his time in jail as if it had been a minor inconvenience, almost an adventure. His tone was light, conversational, the voice of a man recounting an anecdote rather than acknowledging a serious breach of trust. Violet set his cup before him and took the chair opposite, leaving a careful distance between them. "Benjamin," she interrupted his monologue, "we need to discuss what happens now." His expression sobered. "Of course. I understand you're upset about the mortgage situation. I admit I made errors in judgment, but I was trying to secure our future. By gambling away our payment? By planning to sell our land without consulting me?" Violet's composure cracked slightly. "Those aren't errors in judgment. They're betrayals." Benjamin had the grace to look chagrined. "You're right. I should have been honest with you." He reached for her hand, which she withdrew. "But Violet, I truly believed I could turn things around. Crawford's offer seemed like providence, enough to clear our debts and still have capital for a fresh start." "A fresh start where?" Violet asked. "You never mentioned leaving." Benjamin shifted in his seat. "I thought perhaps Denver. Or even back east. There are opportunities for a man with the right connections." "And what about my teaching? Our home here?" "You could teach anywhere," he said dismissively. "And this place," he gestured around the cabin, "it was always meant to be temporary. A stepping stone to better things." Violet stared at him, truly seeing for perhaps the first time how fundamentally their visions diverged. "This isn't temporary to me, Benjamin. This is the life I chose. The home I've built." "Our home," he corrected gently. "One we can rebuild together, wherever we go." The use of "we" struck Violet as presumptuous after all that had happened. Yet it also highlighted the central question she'd been avoiding. Were they still truly a "we" at all? "I spoke with the bank," she said instead of addressing this directly. "I've restructured our loan under my name, using my teaching salary as security." Benjamin's expression flickered between surprise and annoyance. "You had no right to make such arrangements without consulting me." Just as you had no right to gamble away our money or sell our property. Violet countered. The new arrangement ensures we won't lose the homestead while you reconsider your priorities. My priorities have always been our welfare, Benjamin insisted, his voice hardening. Everything I've done has been for us. The saloon girl on your lap, was she for us too? The barb struck home. Benjamin's face flushed. A momentary indiscretion. Meaningless. Like drawing your gun on Marshall Cormack? Like lying to me for months. Violet stood, unable to remain seated under the weight of her emotions. I've made allowances for your behavior, Benjamin. I've made excuses to myself and others. I can't do it anymore. Benjamin rose as well, his expression darkening. This is his influence, isn't it? That Marshall has filled your head with nonsense while I was locked away. Blake Cormack has nothing to do with my decisions, Violet said firmly, though the use of the Marshall's first name didn't escape Benjamin's notice. Blake, is it? His voice dropped dangerously. How friendly you've become in such a short time. He's been nothing but professional and respectful, which is more than I can say for my own husband lately. Benjamin stepped closer, his charm evaporating. I've heard the rumors, Violet. Seen how you look at him. Do you think I'm blind? There's nothing inappropriate between us, Violet insisted, though she felt heat rise in her cheeks at the partial truth of this statement. While nothing physical had occurred, she couldn't deny the connection. She felt to Blake, a connection that made her increasingly aware of what was missing in her marriage. Don't lie to me, Benjamin hissed, grabbing her arm. You've made me a laughingstock in this town. My own wife, running to another man the moment I'm in trouble. Violet tried to pull away. You're hurting me. You've hurt me far worse, he retorted, tightening his grip. After everything I've done for you, bringing you west, giving you this life, I built this life, Violet interrupted. With my teaching, my savings. You've contributed nothing but empty promises and mounting debts. The truth of her words seemed to infuriate him further. His free hand rose, and for a terrible moment, Violet thought he might strike her. Instead, the door burst open. Blake Cormack stood in the doorway, his expression thunderous. Take your hands off her, Calloway. Benjamin released Violet immediately, his face contorting with rage. This is my home, Marshall. You have no right to barge in. I heard raised voices, Blake said evenly, though his eyes, fixed on Violet, revealed genuine concern. Everything all right, Mrs. Calloway? Violet rubbed her arm where Benjamin's fingers had dug in. We were just discussing our situation, she said carefully. Blake didn't move from the doorway. Perhaps such discussions should wait until tempers have cooled. Perhaps you should mind your own business, Benjamin snapped. Or, is my wife your business now? The accusation hung in the air, charged with implications none of them could afford to acknowledge openly. Your wife's safety is the business of any decent man, Blake replied, his tone deceptively mild. Especially when she bears marks from your grip. Violet glanced down to see red marks forming on her arm. The sight of them, physical evidence of how far things had deteriorated, solidified something within her. Benjamin, she said quietly but firmly, I think you should leave. Her husband stared at her in disbelief. Leave? This is my home. A home you were willing to sell without my knowledge, Violet reminded him. A home you've contributed nothing toward keeping these past months. You can't throw me out, Benjamin protested, looking between Violet and Blake. This is my property as much as yours. Actually, Blake interjected, Wyoming territorial law gives Mrs. Calloway equal claim to the property as your wife. And since she's the one making the mortgage payments now, I imagine the bank would support her position. Benjamin's face reddened. This is absurd. You have no authority here, Marshall. No, Blake agreed. But Sheriff Rollins does, and I'm sure he'd be interested to hear about your handling of Mrs. Calloway just now. Violet stepped forward. Please, both of you. This isn't helping. She turned to Benjamin. I'm not asking you to leave permanently.
Just.
For tonight. We both need time to think clearly. For a moment, it seemed Benjamin might refuse. Then, with deliberate calm, he retrieved his jacket. Very well, he said coldly. I'll stay in town tonight. But this conversation isn't over, Violet. He glared at Blake. And you, Marshall. Your interference won't be forgotten. After Benjamin had gone, Violet sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. You shouldn't have come, she said, though there was no real reproach in her voice. Blake remained by the door. I told myself I was just checking in as promised. But truthfully, I was worried. He gestured to her arm. With good reason, it seems. Violet touched the marks, which were already fading. He's never done that before. The first time is always just at the first, Blake said quietly. Rarely the last. The implication settled heavily between them. What am I going to do? Violet asked, more to herself than to him. Blake moved finally, taking the chair Benjamin had vacated, though he maintained a respectful distance. That's not for me to say. But whatever you decide, you don't have to face it alone. Don't I? Violet looked up at him. You'll be gone by week's end. Benjamin will still be here. The gossip will continue. And I'll have to live with the consequences of whatever choice I make. That's true, Blake acknowledged. I can't change the realities you face. But, Violet. He hesitated, then continued with careful honesty. You're stronger than you realize. I've seen it every day since we met. His faith in her, so simply expressed, brought unexpected tears to her eyes. I don't feel strong. Few truly strong people do. Blake's voice softened. They just do what needs doing, one step at a time. They sat in silence for a while, the tension of Benjamin's departure gradually easing. As twilight deepened into dusk, Blake finally stood. I should go, he said reluctantly. Will you be all right here alone? Violet nodded. I have my shotgun. And honestly, I don't think Benjamin will return tonight. His pride won't allow it. Blake seemed unconvinced, but respected her assessment. At the door, he paused. I meant what I said about not facing this alone. Sheriff Rollins can keep an eye on things after I leave. Thank you. Violet followed him onto the porch. For everything. In the gathering darkness, with crickets beginning their nightly chorus and the first stars appearing overhead, something shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that had grown despite all reasonable caution. Violet, Blake began, his voice rough with emotion he'd kept carefully contained until now. Don't, she interrupted gently.
Not yet.
There's too much unresolved. He nodded, understanding. Good night, then. As he rode away, Violet remained on the porch, her thoughts in turmoil. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a life different from the one she'd planned, a life that might include the quiet, honorable man who'd come to mean more to her than she'd believed possible in so short a time. But first, she had to decide what to do about the life she already had. Benjamin did not return the next day, nor the day after. Violet learned from Martha Wilkins, who couldn't resist delivering the gossip despite her disapproval, that he had taken a room at the hotel and was seen drinking heavily at the Silver Dollar each night. He's telling anyone who'll listen that you've taken up with that Marshall, Martha added, clearly expecting a denial. Then he's lying, Violet replied simply, as he has about many things lately. Martha's pinched expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced, but Violet found she cared less about the older woman's opinion than she once had. On the third day, Violet returned from teaching to find Benjamin waiting on the porch. He was sober and well-dressed, his manner contrite. May I come in? He asked formally. I've had time to reflect on my behavior. Warily, Violet agreed. Inside, Benjamin remained standing, hat in hand like a suitor calling for the first time. I want to apologize, he began. My actions were inexcusable. The gambling, the deception about our finances, my behavior when I returned home, all of it. He looked genuinely remorseful. I've been a poor husband to you, Violet. She regarded him cautiously. Yes, you have. If her bluntness surprised him, he didn't show it. I understand why you asked me to leave. Why you might be considering more permanent separation. I haven't made any decisions yet, Violet said truthfully. Benjamin nodded. That's fair. I don't deserve immediate forgiveness. He took a deep breath. But I'm asking for a chance to earn back your trust. To be the husband you deserve. Part of Violet, the part that had fallen in love with Benjamin's charm and dreams, wanted to believe him. Another part, wiser now, recognized the pattern of contrition followed by renewed promises that inevitably dissolved into disappointment. What's changed, Benjamin? She asked. Why should I believe this time is different? Because I've lost everything that matters, he said quietly. My self-respect, your trust, our future together. He set his hat on the table. I've spoken with Pastor Miller about my weaknesses. He's agreed to counsel me. This surprised Violet. Benjamin had always been dismissive of religion beyond the social advantages of church attendance. That's commendable, she acknowledged. I've also found work, he continued. Real work, not schemes or gambles. Mr. Henderson needs help at the lumber mill. It's not glamorous, but it's honest pay. Violet studied him, trying to gauge his sincerity. The Benjamin she'd married had always considered manual labor beneath him, preferring to chase elusive business opportunities that never quite materialized. You'd work at the mill? She asked skeptically. For regular wages? I've already started, he said. 3 days now. You can ask Henderson yourself. This was unexpected enough to give Violet pause. Perhaps Benjamin truly was making an effort to change. What about the drinking? She pressed. Martha says you've been at the saloon every night. Benjamin grimaced. Martha Wilkins should mind her own affairs. But yes, I've been drinking. Feeling sorry for myself, mostly. He met her eyes directly. That stops now, too. I've made promises before that I've broken. I know words mean little at this point. I'm asking for the chance to show you with actions instead. Violet felt torn. She'd built a life with this man, taken vows before God and community. If there was a genuine chance at redemption, didn't she owe it to their marriage to try? Yet even as she considered this, Blake Cormack's face rose unbidden in her mind, his quiet strength, his unwavering respect for her independence, the connection that had grown between them despite all propriety. I need time, she said finally. This isn't a decision I can make lightly. Benjamin nodded, appearing to accept this. Of course. May I call on you? Properly, I mean, like when we were courting. No presumptions, no demands. The request was so unexpected that Violet found herself agreeing before she'd fully considered the implications. I suppose that would be acceptable. Relief washed over Benjamin's features. Thank you, Violet. That's more than I deserve. He retrieved his hat. Would tomorrow evening be convenient? I could bring supper from the hotel. Tomorrow is fine, she said, still somewhat bewildered by this transformed version of her husband. After he left, Violet sat for a long time, wondering if she'd just made a terrible mistake or taken the first step toward healing her marriage. Either way, she realized with a pang, she needed to speak with Blake before his departure to clarify what had and hadn't been between them and what could or couldn't be. Blake was packing his few belongings in his room at the boarding house when a knock came at his door. He opened it to find Violet standing in the hallway, looking uncertain. May I speak with you? She asked. It's important. He nodded, stepping back to let her enter while leaving the door ajar for propriety's sake. The small room offered little privacy, but the boarding house was mostly empty at this hour. Benjamin came to see me, Violet said without preamble. He's apologized. Says he wants to change, to earn back my trust. Blake kept his expression neutral despite the sinking feeling in his chest. I see. He's working at the lumber mill, talking to Pastor Miller. Violet twisted her hands together. He wants to
Court me again.
start fresh. And what do you want? Blake asked quietly. Violet looked up at him, her green eyes troubled. I don't know. That's why I'm here. I need to understand what's between us before I can decide anything about Benjamin. Blake moved to the window, needing distance to think clearly. He'd been asking himself the same question for days, fighting an attraction that had no future against all his better judgment. What's between us, he said finally, is something I didn't expect and certainly didn't seek. Nor I, Violet admitted. Yet here we are. Blake turned back to face her. I leave for Cheyenne tomorrow. I know. My work keeps me moving. It's not a life conducive to. He gestured vaguely, unable to name what might have been between them under different circumstances. To marriage. Violet supplied. Family? The words hung in the air, simultaneously too much and not enough to encompass what they were discussing. Yes, Blake acknowledged. I chose this path knowing its limitations. And I chose marriage, Violet said softly. Made vows I still believe mean something, despite everything. They looked at each other in silence, recognizing the impossible situation confronting them. Two honorable people drawn together against all reason or convenience, facing obligations and choices that couldn't simply be cast aside. If Benjamin is sincere in his desire to change, Blake said carefully, perhaps your marriage can be salvaged. I wouldn't wish to stand in the way of that. Violet stepped closer. And if he isn't sincere? If nothing changes? Blake met her gaze directly. Then you'll face that challenge with the same courage you've shown these past days. And you'll make whatever decision is right for your future. Without you in it, she said, a statement rather than a question. The pain that flashed across Blake's features was answer enough. I have obligations elsewhere. Commitments I've made that I can't simply abandon. I understand, Violet said, though her eyes betrayed her disappointment. I didn't come here expecting declarations or promises. I just needed clarity. As did I. Blake hesitated, then continued with careful honesty. In another life, Violet Sullivan Calloway, I would have been proud to court you properly, to build something lasting together. The admission cost him, she could see. This man who kept his emotions carefully guarded had just opened a door she hadn't been sure existed. In another life, she echoed softly, I would have welcomed that courtship. For a moment, they stood at the precipice of possibilities. Neither could pursue a recognition of what might have been under different stars. Then Violet straightened her shoulders. I should go. Benjamin is calling tomorrow evening. Will you give him another chance? Blake couldn't help asking. I don't know yet, she answered honestly. But I owe it to myself, to the woman who believed in those wedding vows, to consider it carefully. Blake nodded, respecting her integrity even as it drove the final wedge between whatever might have been possible for them. At the door, Violet paused. Goodbye, Blake Cormack. I hope you find happiness in your travels. And I hope you find it right here, he replied. You deserve nothing less. After she left, Blake stood at the window, watching her walk down the street toward home. The approaching sunset painted Copper Creek in golden hues, lending a bittersweet beauty to a day that marked endings rather than beginnings. Tomorrow he would ride to Cheyenne as planned. Violet would meet with Benjamin to determine the future of their marriage. Life would continue along the paths they'd chosen before their brief intersection in this small Wyoming town. It was the right thing, the honorable thing. Blake had always prided himself on doing what was right, regardless of personal cost. Yet as night fell over Copper Creek, he found himself wondering for the first time in years if the life he'd built was truly enough. Benjamin arrived promptly at 6 the following evening, carrying a basket from the hotel restaurant and a small bouquet of wildflowers. His manner was courteous, almost shy, reminiscent of their early courtship days when he'd worked to win her favor. Violet accepted both offerings with polite thanks, setting the table while Benjamin described his work at the lumber mill. He spoke of sore muscles and blistered hands with rueful good humor rather than complaint, showing her calluses forming on his previously soft palms. "Mr. Henderson says I'm a quick learner," he said. "He's hinted there might be an opportunity in the office side of things once I've proven myself on the floor." Violet nodded, serving the roast chicken and potatoes he'd brought. "That sounds promising." "It's honest work," Benjamin acknowledged. "Not the grand opportunities I've chased, but there's satisfaction in it I hadn't expected." They ate in relative comfort, discussing neutral topics: town gossip, the progress of Violet's students, the changing weather. Benjamin drank water rather than wine, ate moderately, and didn't once mention the Marshall or the events that had led to their separation. After dinner, he helped clear the dishes, something he'd rarely done during their marriage, and declined her offer of coffee. "I should go," he said. "I start early tomorrow." At the door, he turned. "May I call on you again? Perhaps Sunday after church." Violet considered this. The evening had been pleasant enough, unmarred by arguments or recriminations. Benjamin seemed genuinely committed to his new approach. Sunday would be fine, she agreed. His smile was warm but restrained.
"Thank you, Violet."
"This means more than I can express." After he left, Violet sat on the porch, watching stars emerge overhead. The evening should have reassured her about Benjamin's intentions. Instead, she felt strangely hollow. She found herself thinking of Blake, who had likely already left for Cheyenne. Had their parting truly been the end? Would she ever see him again? More troubling was the realization that despite Benjamin's apparent transformation, she had felt nothing during their dinner that resembled the connection she'd experienced with Blake in their brief acquaintance. No spark of interest, no flutter of anticipation, just the comfortable familiarity of shared history. Was that enough to rebuild a marriage upon? Or was she merely delaying an inevitable conclusion out of obligation and fear? Violet had no answers as she finally went inside, only questions that would keep her awake long into the night. The journey to Cheyenne typically took 3 days on horseback, but Blake pushed harder, arriving in 2. He reported to the territorial marshal's office, received his new assignment tracking a gang of cattle rustlers operating near the Montana border, and should have departed immediately. Instead, he found himself lingering in the city, his usual efficiency abandoned as thoughts of Copper Creek and Violet continued to distract him. "You look like a man with something on his mind," observed Chief Marshal Williams, a grizzled veteran who had supervised Blake for over a decade. "Trouble in Copper Creek?" Blake shook his head. "Nothing official." Williams studied him shrewdly. "Unofficial, then. Woman trouble." Blake's expression must have confirmed the guess, for Williams chuckled. "Never thought I'd see the day." The legendary Blake Cormack, undone by a pretty face. "It's not like that," Blake protested, though in truth, it was exactly like that. "Isn't it?" Williams leaned back in his chair. "Son, I've known you 15 years. Watched you turn down promotions that would have kept you in one place. Seen you ride out on Christmas Day because duty called. Never once have I seen you hesitate over an assignment." Blake couldn't deny the observation. "This is different. Complicated. Life generally is." Williams sighed. "Is she married? Is that the complication?" "Yes," Blake admitted. "Though the marriage appears to be failing." "Appears to be, or is?" Williams pressed. "Because that distinction matters, especially for a man with a badge." Blake thought of Violet and Benjamin, their broken trust, their uncertain reconciliation. "I don't know," he said honestly. "When I left, they were attempting to work things out." Williams nodded sagely. "Then there's your answer. A man of honor doesn't interfere in another man's marriage, no matter how appealing the wife might be." "I know that," Blake said, perhaps more sharply than intended. "I've never acted improperly." "Never said you did." Williams regarded him thoughtfully. "But you're thinking about going back, aren't you? Finding some excuse to return to Copper Creek." The question hit uncomfortably close to home. Blake had indeed been contemplating reasons to revisit the town follow-up investigations, paperwork that needed completion, a dozen flimsy pretexts that wouldn't withstand serious scrutiny. "I have an assignment," Blake said instead of answering directly. "The rustlers won't catch themselves." Williams studied him a moment longer, then nodded. "That they won't." He stood, signaling the end of the conversation. "Just remember, Blake, the badge comes with responsibilities. Personal feelings take second place. Always have, always will." "I'm aware of my duty," Blake replied stiffly. As he left the office, Blake knew Williams was right. His duty lay with his badge, just as Violet's obligations remained with her marriage, troubled though it might be. Their paths had crossed briefly and would now diverge, as they should have from the beginning. Yet as he prepared for his journey north, Blake couldn't shake the feeling that he was leaving something essential behind, something he might never find again. Sunday after church, Benjamin escorted Violet on a walk through town. His behavior remained impeccable, attentive without being possessive, friendly with her acquaintances, respectful of the distance she maintained between them. Several townsfolk noted this public reconciliation with approving nods. Martha Wilkins made a point of stopping them to express how pleased she was to see them, working things out like proper Christian folk. "People are watching," Violet observed as they continued their stroll. "Making judgments." "Let them," Benjamin said. "Their approval or disapproval means nothing compared to earning back your trust." The sentiment was right, yet something in his delivery struck Violet as practiced, a line rehearsed for maximum effect rather than spoken from genuine feeling. She pushed the thought aside, reminding herself that Benjamin was trying. The past week had shown consistent effort, steady work at the mill, regular attendance at Pastor Miller's counseling sessions, sobriety, and respectful treatment of her boundaries. "I spoke with Mr. Peterson at the bank yesterday," Benjamin said as they neared the town square. "I've arranged to contribute half my wages toward our mortgage." Violet glanced at him, surprised. "That's thoughtful. Thank you. It's the least I can do." Benjamin guided her to a bench beneath a cottonwood tree. "Violet, I've been thinking about our future. What I want it to look like." She tensed slightly, anticipating another grand scheme or unrealistic plan. Instead, Benjamin continued soberly. "I've been chasing fantasies, get-rich-quick opportunities, shortcuts to success. It's brought us nothing but hardship." He met her gaze directly. "I'm done with all that. I want to build something real, something solid. Even if it takes years instead of weeks." "What specifically are you proposing?" Violet asked cautiously. "That we focus on what we have, our homestead, your teaching, my work at the mill. Live within our means. Perhaps expand the cattle herd gradually, as we can afford it." He smiled. "Nothing glamorous. Just honest work and steady progress." It was exactly what Violet had wanted from the beginning, realistic goals pursued with diligence rather than dreams built on sand. Yet hearing Benjamin articulate this vision now, after everything that had happened, left her strangely unmoved. "That sounds sensible," she said, aware of the inadequacy of her response. Benjamin studied her. "You don't believe me." "I want to," Violet admitted. "But words come easily to you, Benjamin. Always have." Instead of the defensive reaction she expected, he nodded. "Fair enough. I've given you ample reason for skepticism." He took her hand gently. "May I ask what would convince you? What would it take to rebuild your trust?" The question was reasonable, even necessary. Yet Violet found herself unable to articulate an answer that felt honest. Because the truth she'd been avoiding since Blake's departure was that her hesitation stemmed not just from Benjamin's past behavior, but from her own changed heart. "Time," she said finally. "Consistency. Proof that this isn't simply another performance that will fade once you've achieved your goal." "And what is my goal in your mind?" Benjamin asked quietly. Violet met his gaze. "Getting me back. Restoring your reputation in town. Returning to the life you had before." A flicker of something anger? Frustration? Crossed Benjamin's face before his expression smoothed into understanding. I deserve that assessment. He released her hand. I'll continue to demonstrate through actions that my intentions are genuine, however long it takes. As they walked back toward the homestead, Violet wondered if she was being unfair. Benjamin was making visible efforts to change. Shouldn't she meet him halfway? Wasn't forgiveness and reconciliation the Christian ideal they'd both been raised to value? Yet beneath these considerations lay a more fundamental question. Did she still love Benjamin Calloway? Or had she simply grown accustomed to the idea of being his wife, unable to imagine an alternative until Blake Cormack had shown her one existed? The Montana Territory stretched vast and wild before Blake as he tracked the rustlers north from Wyoming. The work should have consumed his attention completely. These men were dangerous, responsible for at least 2 murders along with their thefts, yet his mind continually drifted back to Copper Creek. 2 weeks had passed since his departure. 2 weeks of wondering what had transpired between Violet and Benjamin, whether reconciliation had been achieved or abandonment risked. 2 weeks of remembering green eyes and quiet strength, of conversations that had felt more meaningful than any he'd experienced in years. Getting careless in your old age, Marshall, he muttered to himself one evening, setting up camp in a sheltered draw. Dwelling on what couldn't be changed was not only foolish, but potentially dangerous in his line of work. Yet that night, as on too many others lately, he dreamed of Violet not in any improper way, but simply talking with him on her porch, laughing at something he'd said, her face illuminated by lamplight as she poured coffee in her small cabin. Morning found him irritable and unrest. He broke camp with mechanical efficiency, determined to focus solely on his mission. The rustlers' trail led toward a remote valley where local settlers reported suspicious cattle movements. With luck, he'd overtake them within days. Instead, fate intervened in the form of a messenger from Cheyenne, a young deputy who'd ridden hard to find him. Marshall Cormack, the young man called, approaching Blake's camp with his badge visible. "Chief Marshall Williams sent me. You're needed back in Wyoming." Blake's first thought was of Violet, though he knew that was irrational. Williams wouldn't dispatch a messenger for personal matters. "What's happened?" he asked, accepting the sealed orders the deputy carried. "Bank robbery in Laramie. 3 men dead, including a child. The gang was last seen heading toward Copper Creek." Blake's blood ran cold at the mention of the town. "Copper Creek? You're certain?" The deputy nodded. "Witnesses described them fleeing southwest. Chief thinks they might try to lose themselves in the mountains near there before continuing to Colorado Territory." Breaking the seal on his orders, Blake confirmed what the deputy had already conveyed. He was to abandon the rustler investigation and proceed immediately to intercept the bank robbers before they could cross territorial lines. "When did this happen?" he asked, already packing his gear. "4 days ago." "I've been tracking you for 3. Blake calculated distances in his head. If he rode hard, he could reach Copper Creek in 2 days. The robbers, likely trying to avoid main roads, might take longer, but not much. "You've done good work finding me," he told the deputy. "Return to Cheyenne and inform the chief I'm en route to Copper Creek. I'll wire further information once I've assessed the situation there." As the deputy departed, Blake felt a complicated mixture of emotions. Professionally, the assignment was straightforward. Dangerous criminals needed apprehending before they could harm others. Personally, it meant returning to the town he'd left behind, to the woman whose future he'd tried to remove himself from. Duty demanded he focus on the former and ignore the latter. As he mounted and turned his horse southwest, Blake promised himself he would do exactly that, no matter what awaited him in Copper Creek. The summer heat had settled over Copper Creek like a wool blanket, making the schoolhouse stifling despite open windows and doors. Violet dismissed her students early, unable to keep their attention in such oppressive conditions. As the children scattered, she remained at her desk organizing lessons for the following day. Teaching had always been her refuge, a space where she felt competent and purposeful regardless of personal turmoil. And turmoil certainly described her current state. 3 weeks of Benjamin's reformed behavior had impressed everyone in town. He worked diligently at the mill, attended church regularly, contributed to their mortgage as promised, and treated Violet with unfailing courtesy during their increasingly frequent interactions. Yet something fundamental was missing. The connection they'd once shared, or that she believed they shared, remained elusive. Conversations felt performative rather than genuine. His attention seemed calculated rather than spontaneous. Or perhaps, Violet admitted to herself, the fault lay not with Benjamin but with her. Perhaps her heart had changed irrevocably during those tumultuous days when Blake Cormack had stood beside her, showing her what true respect and understanding might feel like between a man and a woman. The schoolhouse door creaked, interrupting her thoughts. She looked up expecting a student who had forgotten something. Instead, Benjamin stood in the doorway, his expression uncharacteristically serious. "Benjamin," she greeted him, surprise evident in her voice. "Aren't you supposed to be at the mill?" "Mr. Henderson gave me the afternoon off." He entered, closing the door behind him, in action that immediately put Violet on alert. "We need to talk, Violet." She set down her pen.
About what?
"About us. About this arrangement we've been maintaining." Benjamin approached her desk, his usual charm absent. "It's been nearly a month since I began trying to prove myself to you. I've done everything you asked, worked honestly, lived soberly, contributed financially, respected your boundaries." "Yes, you have," Violet acknowledged carefully. "And I appreciate those efforts." "Do you?" His voice hardened slightly. "Because from where I stand, nothing has changed between us. You're no closer to accepting me back as your husband than you were the day I was released from jail." Violet tensed at his tone. "Trust takes time to rebuild, Benjamin. Time isn't the issue." He moved closer. "Your feelings are, or rather, your lack of them." She couldn't deny the accusation, though she'd tried to hide her emotional detachment during their carefully orchestrated interactions. "I'm trying," she said, which was at least partially true. "No, you're not." Benjamin's facade cracked, revealing the anger beneath. "You're going through motions, playing the role of the considerate wife, while keeping me at arm's length. All the while thinking of him."
Him.
Violet stood, uncomfortable with Benjamin looming over her seated form. "Don't insult me by pretending ignorance." Benjamin's eyes flashed. "Cormac, the marshal. The man you were so quick to turn to while I was locked away." "That's not fair," Violet protested. "Blake Marshal Cormac merely offered assistance when I needed it. There was nothing improper between us." "Blake," Benjamin repeated with bitter emphasis. "Always Blake, never the marshal in private, is it? Don't think I haven't noticed how your expression changes whenever his name is mentioned in town." Violet moved around the desk, maintaining distance between them. "You're imagining things. Marshal Cormac left weeks ago. He has nothing to do with us." "He has everything to do with us." Benjamin slammed his palm on the desk, making her jump. "You're comparing me to him, measuring my efforts against some ideal you've created based on a man you knew for days." The accusation struck too close to home. Violet had indeed found herself making such comparisons, though she'd tried to resist them. "This isn't about Blake Cormac," she insisted. "It's about trust that was broken long before he arrived, and you've clearly decided it can't be repaired." Benjamin's anger seemed to drain suddenly, replaced by cold determination. "I've humbled myself, worked jobs beneath me, endured pitying looks and whispers, all to win back a wife who has no intention of truly being mine again." Violet recognized the dangerous shift in his demeanor. This wasn't the contrite, reformed Benjamin of recent weeks or even the charming, deceptive husband of their earlier marriage. This was something colder, more calculated. "Perhaps we both need more time," she suggested, edging toward the door.
No.
Benjamin blocked her path. We've had time enough. Either you're my wife in truth, not just in name, or we need to make other arrangements. What arrangements? Violet asked warily. Benjamin smiled without warmth. I've received an interesting offer. James Crawford still wants our land, specifically the water rights. He's willing to pay handsomely, more than enough to settle our debts and provide us both with fresh starts. Separately, you mean? Violet realized. Precisely. You take your share and go wherever you please back east, perhaps. I'll do the same. His expression hardened. Or, we can truly reconcile. Share a home, a bed, a future as husband and wife should. The ultimatum hung between them like a thundercloud. Violet knew Benjamin was forcing her hand, demanding she either commit fully to their marriage or end it completely. You're asking me to choose now? This moment, she said, playing for time. Not this very instant, no. But soon. Benjamin moved toward the door. I've been patient. That patience is at an end. He paused, hand on the latch. 1 week, Violet. Decide what you truly want. Because this performance we've been giving for the town's benefit ends then, one way or another. After he left, Violet sank onto a student bench, her legs suddenly unsteady. Benjamin's mask had finally slipped, revealing that his transformation had been exactly what she'd suspected, a calculated effort to either win her back or position himself advantageously for a final separation. The revelation should have devastated her. Instead, she felt an odd sense of clarity. The choice before her was stark but simple: recommit to a marriage built on shifting sand or forge a new path alone. As she gathered her things to leave, a commotion outside drew her attention. People were gathering in the street, pointing and talking excitedly. Through the window, Violet saw Sheriff Rollins hurrying toward the crowd, his hand on his pistol. Something was happening in Copper Creek. Something that pushed her personal dilemma temporarily aside as she stepped out to investigate. Blake rode into Copper Creek with the dust of hard travel coating his clothes and a grim determination setting his features. He'd pushed himself and his horse to the limit, covering ground at a pace that had left them both exhausted. The town appeared peaceful at first glance, typical afternoon activities proceeding as normal. No sign of the bank robbers he sought, though that didn't mean they weren't nearby, perhaps watching from the surrounding hills before making their move. He dismounted before the sheriff's office, drawing curious glances from passers-by who recognized him despite his brief tenure in their town. Inside, he found Rollins cleaning his shotgun. Marshal Cormac, the sheriff, greeted him with surprise. Didn't expect to see you back in these parts. Blake accepted the offered handshake. Tracking fugitives. Bank robbers from Laramie. They killed 3 people, including a child. Trail suggests they're headed this way, possibly aiming for the Colorado border. Rollins's expression darkened.
Damn.
Any descriptions? 3 men. Leader goes by Silas Tanner, tall, scarred face, missing 2 fingers on his left hand. Others are younger, brothers named Ellis. All armed and demonstrated willingness to kill. The sheriff set his shotgun aside. Haven't seen anyone matching those descriptions, but I'll alert my deputies. How long ago was the robbery?
6 days now.
If they're avoiding main trails, they could arrive any time within the next day or 2. Blake glanced toward the street. How many men can you deputize if needed? 6 reliable ones. More if we're desperate. Rollins studied Blake. You look dead on your feet, Marshal. When did you last sleep? Blake waved off the concern. I'll rest after we've secured the town. First priority is establishing lookouts on the approaches. Tanner's gang typically hits banks just before closing, maximum cash on hand, minimum time for pursuit before nightfall. As they discussed strategy, Blake fought to keep his thoughts focused on the task at hand rather than wondering about Violet. Had her reconciliation with Benjamin proceeded? Were they living together again as husband and wife? The questions gnawed at him despite his efforts to suppress them. Word's spreading already, Rollins observed, nodding toward the window where townspeople had begun gathering, watching the sheriff's office with obvious curiosity. Good. Vigilance helps. Blake moved to the door. I'll check the bank's security while you organize the deputies. Meet back here in an hour to finalize plans. Outside, the crowd parted respectfully, though whispers followed him down the street. Blake nodded acknowledgments, but kept moving, intent on reaching the bank before closing time. He was halfway there when he saw her. Violet stood outside the schoolhouse, speaking with a mother and child. The late afternoon sun caught in her auburn hair, creating a halo effect that made Blake's chest tighten with feelings he'd tried and failed to leave behind in Wyoming. She hadn't noticed him yet. He could have continued past, focused solely on his professional duties as he'd promised himself he would. Instead, he found himself altering course, drawn to her as inevitably as a compass needle to north. She looked up as he approached, her conversation faltering mid-sentence. Surprise registered in those green eyes, followed by something that might have been joy before caution reasserted itself. "Marshal Cormac," she said formally, though her voice carried a warmth that belied the title. "You've returned to Copper Creek, madam." He touched his hat brim, painfully aware of the mother's curious gaze shifting between them. "Official business, I'm afraid. Bank robbers may be headed this way." Concern immediately replaced whatever other emotions she'd been experiencing. "How dangerous are these men?" "Dangerous enough that folks should stay alert," Blake answered, his professional tone returning. "I'd advise keeping the children close to home until we've resolved the situation." The mother beside Violet paled, clutching her son's hand tighter. "I should tell my husband." "Excuse me, Mrs. Calloway, Marshal." She hurried away, leaving them in a moment of relative privacy despite the street's other occupants. "You look tired," Violet said softly, her eyes taking in his trail-worn appearance. "Long ride," Blake acknowledged. "How have you been, Violet?" The question encompassed far more than casual inquiry. They both knew it. "Managing," she answered after a slight hesitation. "Benjamin has been making efforts to change." Blake nodded, ignoring the twist of disappointment in